Oklahoma's adult sex offender registry has about 8,000 men and women on its rolls. Some must register for life, others for 15 or 25 years, depending on their likelihood to reoffend. It's called the tier system. Dallas Owens is on the registry for life.
Dallas? Hey, how are you? How you doing?
As police did a routine check to see if he was in compliance with registration requirements and restrictions on where offenders can live, we asked what it's like being on the registry.
It's just, you're embarrassed and you're scared.
His wife didn't want us to show her face. She has an issue with the tier system.
You can have offenders who have committed very horrific crimes who are on a lower tier than someone whose crime is not that horrific, and they can be on the highest tier.
The registry was developed more than 20 years ago to let the public know where sex offenders live after they get out of prison and what offenses they committed. The entire registry is on the Department of Corrections website. Many police and sheriff's departments have websites that only include offenders living within their boundaries. Some are interactive, showing sex offenders' photos and home locations on a map. We printed out the names of every single person the Department of Corrections says should be registered as a sex offender in Oklahoma. It took 154 pages, and when we laid them out, covered an area of nearly 10 by 12 feet. However, not everyone on this list has registered. According to the Department of Corrections' Jerry Massey, about 1 in 10 don't. Sergeant John Adams heads up the Tulsa Police Sex Offenders Unit. He blames laws restricting where sex offenders can live for the high number that fail to register. Circles on this map show areas off limits to sex offenders.
It exploded when the state enacted the 2,000-foot safety zone around all parks and playgrounds. It virtually put the city of Tulsa off limits to sex offenders. Once you take out the 2,000-foot radius around all schools, parks, playgrounds, etc., then you take out the industrial areas, there is 10% of Tulsa that a sex offender could live in.
It's a similar situation in all Oklahoma urban areas.
Therefore, they now come to the rural area, to the county, because it is pretty much an open area. They can live basically wherever they want to, as long as they're within the guidelines.
It happened to this offender, who agreed to talk if we didn't show his face.
I got convicted and was guilty of first-degree rape. I can't even find a place to live. It takes me 30 minutes just to get to work, to get to the city limits just to get to work.
Adams says driving sex offenders into rural areas wasn't the legislature's intent when it passed the law.
When they passed this, we went down and we listened to it, and they actually believed that if we make it hard for them to live here, they'll go move to Texas. Well, no, they won't go move to Texas. There's families here, there's support systems here. They're going to live here. They're just not going to register.
Change that from 2,000 feet to 1,500 feet, that would stop a lot of the problems, because it opens the city up to more people to move in there. Now, sure, if nobody wants us to live next to them, but where they want us to live in a box.
Every Friday in Tulsa, officers in unmarked cars fan out across neighborhoods where sex offenders live. They knock on lots of doors to see if offenders are living where they claim to, and if those places comply with restrictions on where they are allowed to live.
Oh, hey, what's going on?
Just making sure this is where you're staying?
Yeah, still yours.
All right. How often does he have to register? You're every 90 days, aren't you?
Correct.
Okay.
Santiago Zabala is one of half a dozen sex offenders police checked on as we rode along. He was convicted of sexual battery. He's properly registered and living where he's allowed. So is Wilma Bryant. She says her neighbors probably aren't aware she's a registered sex offender, convicted of lewd acts on a child.
Nobody knows what I've been in jail for. The only way they can know is when I fill out an application, and that's it. Otherwise, I say nothing to nobody.
Dallas Owens takes the opposite approach with his neighbors.
When that happened and we moved in here, we kind of went around the neighborhood and told everybody what was going on, and they walked me like a hawk and blah, 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 and the owner knows, and the manager knows, and so everybody knows. So.
He says being on the registry changed the way he behaves.
I don't go anywhere alone. I don't go walking around. I don't even walk around the neighborhood alone.
Officers had a problem with Brian Ellsbury's address. He's convicted of indecent exposure, and his house is within 2,000 feet of a school.
But he is living in an area there where he cannot live.
State law prohibits sex offenders from living within 2,000 feet of a park, school, or daycare. But there is an exception.
A lot of our registered sex offenders are still living where they were residing when they were convicted, and they can still do that. So we have some instances where we have a sex offender that lives across the street from the school, and he's perfectly legal, and we can't make him move because he lived there when he got convicted. He did his time, and he came back to that residence, and he's allowed to do that.
State law forbids multiple sex offenders from living at the same address to keep them from clustering in motels, and requires sex offenders to register with local law enforcement within 3 days of moving to any new address. David Kramberg was convicted of sexual assault. He hasn't registered as required. First, officers looked for him in this building. A neighbor said he had moved across the street. There, a woman told officers Kramberg had tried to register.
David's been down there. We've left you voicemails.
Leaving voicemails does not register you as a sex offender.
Oh, I know.
I have over 300 people who are registered in the city of Tulsa,
Okay.
and they seem to be able to come down and register and update.
We've moved
So
exactly
I'm just
like
saying
you
2
told us.
years is come and gone.
The officers staked out a church food pantry for the homeless in an effort to find another man who has failed to register.
Hugo is a guy that has a warrant. He's a homeless guy. He's listed as homeless. And as a homeless person and a registered sex offender, you have to come in once a week to register. Well, Mr. Hugo Vincent Young has yet to do that.
If Young had shown up, he would have been arrested. But Sergeant Adams says even when arrested, those who fail to register rarely face harsh penalties.
Right now, the cases, we'll send a case over, it'll get prosecuted, and the guy that's never registered, he'll get a suspended sentence and be told, you go register now. And we've had the same one over and over again, same cases that we can't get them put back in prison. So it's we're beating our heads against the wall on a lot of these cases.
Adams and offenders say laws governing sex offenders need fixing.
Lawmakers are making these feel-good laws. Yeah, they feel real good when they make them, but they're not looking at the consequences of their action.
We need to get the legislators on board to scrap the whole system and rewrite it. There's no documented proof that the 2,000-foot safe zones work. And what I'd like to see is just a compromise between it. 1,000-foot safe zone, and I would like to see a big hammer if you fail to register, that prison, no exception.
Captain John Davis of the Creek County Sheriff's Office doesn't think the laws are all bad.
The way Oklahoma statute's written, it's a pretty good statute in my opinion. It gives you quite a bit to work with. They've come up, that we've got the 2,000-foot rule. We've got the rule that basically multiple sex offenders can't reside in a single dwelling together. So I think we're on the right track. It just may at some point need some fine-tuning.
Representative Jeannie McDaniel of Tulsa says it would be difficult to get the legislature to change any laws affecting sex offenders. But she believes it's time to look at whether laws restricting where sex offenders live and how long they must register need revamping. Her legislative interim study on the issue is set to begin in October.
The goal is to keep track of those who may reoffend. But I want to hear from law enforcement to see, are there other states doing it more efficiently and yet protecting their citizens at the same time? By no means do I say we don't register people, but we've got to find a way to do it better, faster, more efficiently. And I think that's the way then we have a safer community.
Sergeant Adams says to ensure safety, communities and law enforcement need to know where sex offenders live.
If I've got a sex offender that's registered and we know where he lives and we can let the public know where he lives, then I think that it creates a certain safety aspect, because you can teach your children that, hey, the guy that lives 2 blocks over in this white house, he's a sex offender, so we want to stay away from there. But the ones that are living amongst us that we don't know about, well, you can't warn your children about. You can't take precautions against, because you don't know they're living there.
I think we have this false sense of security that as long as we think we know where they're registered to live and we can look up on the computer and our zip code and know where everybody is, we're okay. That's really not the case.
McDaniel says people just don't commit crimes in their own neighborhoods. So knowing where sex offenders live, or preventing them from living in certain areas, doesn't prevent crimes from happening in those places.